Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. A dreary bank holiday. Even the roads aren't too busy tonight. So few of you have bothered to go out for the day. Well, I can't tell you whether the long, hot summer is now over. I suspect it is, that autumnal feel in the air. But the one forecast I will make is that we are headed into a very, very dramatic political autumn. It's going to be fractious. It's going to be difficult. And I think what you're going to see is the real battles will not be going on between the Labour and Conservative parties. The real battles are going to go on within the Conservative and Labour parties. That is my view. And I say that on the day when a leaked document shows that campaigners are calling for a second referendum and to force Jeremy Corbyn to change the Labour Party's Brexit policy. What they want to do, the People's Vote they call themselves, what they want to do is to secure a motion on the issue at the Labour Party conference. So they want to get this debated and voted on at conference. They are pushing for a referendum on whatever deal or no deal emerges from Theresa May's negotiations. Is there public support for this? Well, they're buoyed by the fact that an opinion poll showed that 42% of people thought that there should be a vote on the final deal. Now, that figure surprised me considerably, particularly given the big Delta poll that was out of the Sun on Sunday 2 weeks ago, showing that actually there were now more people who would vote Brexit than there were on June the 23rd, 2016. But I do actually think, looking at several polls, that the data is right. Because actually what you've now got, you've got Leave voters saying, yeah, all right, let's have another vote. I want to stick two fingers up in a bigger way this time. So there is some support. It's not overwhelming, but there is some considerable support for a second referendum. And this is very much what the People's Vote are going on. Who are, you say, the People's Vote? Well, they are effectively backed by an amalgam of pro-EU organisation. The People's Vote, Chuka-Ramuna originally set the whole thing up. But be in no doubt, the group really behind it is Open Britain, because they make clear on their website that if you sign up to the People's Vote, it's Open Britain that will hold your data. So it's really Open Britain rebranded as the People's Vote. Who backs Open Britain? Who backs the People's Vote? Well, of course, people like Lord Adonis, who says people want to say it was a vote in the dark 2 years ago. No one had any idea what the consequences of Brexit were going to be. Chuka-Ramuna, as I say, pushing very, very hard. Alistair Campbell, of course, heavily involved in this. The British people should be given the chance to say if this is what they voted for. Along with Open Britain, there's a whole raft of organisations like the European movement, like Scientists for the EU, and another groups who I've just never heard of. What I can tell you is who funds Open Britain? George Soros. Who funds the European movement? Well, the European Commission over decades, but this year, George Soros. Who funds Scientists for the EU? Any guesses? Yes, that's right. It's George Soros again. So what you've got here is a campaign very much backed by George Soros, very much backed by the corporates. Funny, isn't it? You never would have thought that the Labour Party would be so taken with giant multinational businessmen, but that's the kind of situation we have today. I have to say, for my own part, I think even calling themselves the People's Vote is a complete outrage. We had the People's Vote, didn't we? On June the 23rd, 2016, that was the People's Vote. As Cameron's document that he spent £9 million pushing through our letterboxes told us, this is your decision and we will implement the outcome. And now we have big campaigns trying to stop it, big campaigns trying to convince the Labour Party that they need to adopt the second referendum position. Now, it's important to note that John McDonnell and others over the course of the last few days have refused to rule this out. So is it going to be plain sailing to get the Labour Party at its conference, if they can get this debated? Is it going to be plain sailing that they will back a second referendum? Oh, no, it won't be. Today, Andy Burnham, remember him, former senior Labour minister, now, of course, Manchester's mayor, and he has said those trying to force Britain into having a second referendum are arrogant and not listening to the will of the people. So pretty clear where Burnham stands. And remember, Barry Gardner, last week, Labour MP, and we talked about him over the weekend, who said holding another referendum on the UK's EU membership could lead to civil disobedience, so angry would people be. So it isn't going to be plain sailing, but what is clear is a very big majority of Labour MPs are strongly inclined towards the EU. Question is, where are the Labour voters on all of this? So I want to know tonight from you, and I particularly want to hear, if possible even exclusively want to hear, I want to hear from Labour voters. Tell me, do you as a Labour voter want your party to advocate a second referendum? And if you think, yep, it's the way we got to go, call 0345 6060 973. Or if, like me, you think the people's vote was 2 years ago, let's just get on with it. Text to 84850. And I wonder, would having a second referendum be a good thing or a bad thing for our trust and faith in the democratic process in this country? Let me know by tweeting using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, those of you watching on Facebook Live, and there are lots of you, can comment there too. But try and comment rather than just fighting with each other the whole time, because I do see a fair bit of that. Let's go to Ian in Beaconsfield. Good evening, Ian.
Nigel, hello. You answered my first comment, which was I don't miss the anti-democracy himself. Mr. Soros is behind these people, and lo and behold, he is indeed.
Yeah. And by the way, Ian, can I just make one quick prediction? What I've now learnt is that if you attack George Soros, you are immediately condemned, and I'm sure we'll see tweets coming through. You're an anti-Semite if you attack George Soros.
Well, of course you are.
The fact that he actually denounced the Jewish religion years ago and is an atheist is by the by.
Yeah, no, totally, yeah. And I think the whole establishment uses the whole anti-Semitic thing to shut down debate on all sorts of things. But let's not digress. I joined the Labour Party because of
Ian, I want to speak to you. I really do. I want to hear what you've got to say. Your line's rubbish. So let's go to somebody else, hopefully with a better line. Let's go to Manchester and speak to Richard. Richard, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. Thank you for having me on again. I'd just like to ask you one thing. In March, we are leaving the EU. Is that correct?
We're supposed to be, Richard, unless the people's vote and others get their way, and we won't leave because we'll have a referendum on the final deal. That's what they hope.
That's what they hope, but it is fantasy land. Up here, the Labour people, they are dead against, and they're very, very upset at the fact that these people are messing about. 17.4 million people vote for us to come out of the EU. That should be respected by both parties.
What I'm hearing, Richard, I'm hearing that the North-South divide on Brexit is now enormous. And I'm hearing that there are some in the South who are being tempted by the idea of a second referendum. But I'm told there's considerable anger amongst Leave voters in the north of England. Would you agree with that?
I certainly would agree with that. We don't take this sort of thing lightly up here, and I think that the majority of people in the country as a whole will abide by the decision of the referendum that 17.4 million people...
I know. The biggest exercise in British democracy ever in our history. Richard, finally, quickly, in your opinion, if Corbyn was to bow to this and the Labour Party conference was to accept this, how much damage could this do Labour electorally next time round?
It would be irreparable, I'm telling you. And also, they don't even know what they're doing. They're playing with people's feelings. People up here are very, very...
Interesting. Richard, thank you. And I simultaneously get a text in saying, "Hi, Nigel, Labour are about to lose huge support in the north of England." Tony, you were there before Richard had finished his first sentence, but you're very, very interesting how people in the north are feeling. Ian in Beaconsfield, I'm back with you.
Yes, Nigel, can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, that's better. Right, far away.
Okay, so I joined the Labour Party because of Mr. Corbyn for various reasons. But I supported him because I know deep down he is a Leaver. But I think he's playing this very, very badly, and I think he's on very thin ice, really. And he really needs to, crack the whip and say, look, this is what we're doing. We are leaving. And he's starting to talk about not leaving the customs union and
Yep.
stuff like that. I mean, it's utter madness, and we cannot allow any debate on a second referendum. If there is a referendum, it needs to be, basically just on the terms. Do you agree with it? And if not, we go to WTO. That's the only thing we could possibly vote on. If there is any choice on any second referendum, I don't agree with it at all. If there is any choice on it not to leave, then that is an undermining of democracy. And to be honest, the reason I think they're trying to get a second one is they will rig it. They will absolutely rig it. And my feeling is they tried to rig the first one and we overwhelmed them. And if you think about it, as conspiratorial as that sounds, that is why they were all so smug and happy to go ahead with it. They thought they had it in the bag and they had absolutely no plan whatsoever.
No. I mean that's. That's absolutely true. But I mean, the problem is, Ian, as you say, Corbyn's been a leaver all his life, but he is really hugely outnumbered at the moment by the Parliamentary Labour Party. He's possibly on thin ice with the other rows that we're not going to discuss right now that are going on. If he was to bow to the will of the majority of the Parliamentary Labour Party, what would happen to your membership of the Labour Party?
I would cancel it immediately.
Immediately. Right, Ian, you couldn't be clearer. Thank you very much indeed. Well, Ian suggesting that the result would be rigged, which is, he's really accusing the establishment and saying they would engage in criminal behaviour. Nobody, none of you could possibly think that the establishment would engage in something criminal to subvert the will of the people. That would be really very, very wrong for any of us to think such a thing. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 7:15. Well, there's a big push to get Labour to change their policy to say we're the party of a second referendum, and even John McDonnell not ruling that out. Tell me, if you're a Labour voter, what do you think of that? How much damage could this do the Labour Party? Lots of people who voted Labour also voted Leave. Before I get back to that, there was speculation yesterday that Vince Cable was on the verge of stepping down as Lib Dem leader. Piece in the Sunday Times saying he's giving a big speech on the 7th of September. And the Lib Dems have responded to this by saying that Vince Cable has no plans to step down anytime soon, but he wants to rewrite the rules for how the party selects its leader. And this is actually very interesting. What he wants to do is open up the leadership to those outside of the party's 12 MPs, as well, of course, as the 12 MPs themselves. He wants to get a broader group of people voting, and he wants people to vote, who will be registered supporters as opposed to fully paid up normal party members. Now, clearly, they have to pay something to reach that position, but to avoid what's happened with entryism to vote for Corbyn and the attempts at the moment of entryism in the Conservative Party to oust May and vote for Boris, they will have to be enrolled for 12 months before they can have their vote. So is this a ludicrous idea? Is the idea that the Lib Dems could be led by somebody who's not an MP, is that ludicrous? Does it show how desperate they are? No, actually, that's the way the world's going. Donald Trump had never held elected office, won the presidency, and has actually, in a remarkable way, united the Republicans, most of them in America. Beppe Grillo, my friend, the former stand-up comedian in Italy, has never stood for elected office and yet led his party to becoming the biggest in Italian politics. And you could argue, whatever I may or may not have done to influence British politics and British public opinion, I never sat in the House of Commons. I did sit, albeit in Strasbourg and Brussels. But I honestly think, the way the world is now, I don't think party leaders need to be on the benches in Westminster. And I think what Cable has done there could be a very clever thing for the Liberal Democrats. Now, the big guns, Alistair Campbell, the Lord Adonises, Chuka Ramuna, they're all there saying Labour needs to change its policy and go for a second referendum. I've told you that Andy Burnham is against it, Barry Gardner's against it. But this is very interesting. Earlier on this evening, you may have heard Ian Payne, and he interviewed Brendan Shilton, former chairman of the Labour Leave campaign, current director of Labour Future. This is what Brendan said on LBC earlier on.
70% of Labour constituencies voted to leave the European Union.
Wow.
And of our 2017 vote, around 5.1 million Labour voters supported leave. It was very clear what leave meant. It meant leaving the political institutions, and Remain campaigners said it would also mean leaving the single market and the customs union. There was no doubt what we were voting for, and the Labour Party has accepted that.
Those figures are amazing. 70% of Labour constituencies voted leave. His estimate is 5.1 million people who voted in 2017 for Mr Corbyn had voted leave in the referendum before. Have to say, I certainly, from my calculations, thought it was 4.5 million. If Brendan's right, but even if he's wrong, the fact is a huge number of Labour voters voted leave. I wonder whether this gang who, you know, sort of meet in North London or wherever it is, no doubt at very smart houses, I wonder whether they really understand, once you get way away from London, and particularly to the Midlands and the North and South Wales, I wonder whether they realise just how strongly many, many Labour leave voters feel. Come on, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that Labour should adopt a second referendum. Tell me I've completely off beam with this. 0345 6060 973. 5 million Labour voters voted leave. If they go for a second referendum, surely this would be suicide. But there are leavers, as I've said already, that do want another vote. I'm a Labour supporter who voted leave. However, I've got no problem with a second referendum, because I think that with clear arguments this time, we win again, says Paul in London. So there are some of you out there who so enjoyed giving the establishment a kicking last time round, you want to really do it with bells on this time round. But actually, most Leave voters say, please, can we just get on with it? Lee is a new caller from Devon. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for having me on.
Not one bit. Now, what do you make of all this?
I think that we should have a second referendum, and I'll give my reasons for it, but I do think there are a lot of Leave voters that knew what they voted for and they wanted out of the single market, wanted out of the customs union, but there are a large majority of Leave voters that weren't sure. There's people that voted, they wanted the Norway-style deal, which you promoted. There's lots of different deals that people sort of voted for. I don't think that everybody knew what they voted for. Once we get a clear idea of what Brexit's going to mean, we should put that to the people. And if it's going to be better than staying in, then Leave should win, surely.
Well, Lee, I mean, on the Norway stuff, you know, David Cameron said we wouldn't want to be like Norway. And I said, what do you mean, rich and catching our own fish? I mean, Norway's deal is better than our deal, but no, I don't want a Norway deal or a Switzerland deal. I mean, I wanted a bespoke British deal. But if they don't want to do a deal with us, even though we're their biggest export market in Europe, then we'll leave on WTO terms. Lee, the problem here is this. Do you not think that having held this dramatic event of a referendum on EU membership, having promised everybody that whatever the result was, it would be respected, that to do all of this again would leave millions of people thinking that British democracy had been totally destroyed?
I see the argument, but if I was a Leave voter and I voted Leave on the promise that we could be like Norway, or I voted...
Well, there was not one... Hang on, Lee. There was not one single document that came out from a Leave campaign saying we would become like Norway. You know, that was not... It wasn't an either or. It wasn't... I mean, that wasn't what was offered to people. You know, and on the single market, you say there's confusion, but, Lee, during that campaign, every single significant player on both the Leave and Remain side said leaving meant leaving the single market. And then, Lee, in the general election, both the Labour and Conservative parties, who got over 80% of the vote, said, vote for us to form a government, we're leaving the single market. Do you understand why some of us, Lee, are really frustrated about this?
Absolutely, but did it not come out of your mouth that you suggested we could have a Norway-style deal? And would that not influence voters?
No, Lee, I said Norway is in a much better position than we are because they're rich and they can catch their own fish. But ultimately, I've argued for many, many years, let's go for a bespoke British option. And that strikes me as being the most sense, not just for us, but for the rest of Europe too. Lee, let me ask you something. As somebody who wants a second referendum, you know, I mean, do you normally vote Labour or Lib Dem? I mean, what do you normally do?
I've normally flipped between Labour and more recently Lib Dems.
OK, so if Labour went for the second referendum, they definitely get your vote.
Yes, they would, yeah.
OK, no, thank you. Well, that's the counter-argument. Lee thinks we do need a second referendum. He thinks many Leave voters were confused, but he said it in a way where he wasn't talking down to them. It's somehow certain politicians who say, well, of course, I mean, people didn't really understand what it was all about. And that makes us want to scream because, actually, this implication that Leave voters were all thick is not very popular. Brian in Surrey says, even though a second referendum would undoubtedly reinforce an even stronger Leave, the idea is insulting and extremely undemocratic. So, in 1997, there was a vote on whether Wales should get devolved powers and have its own assembly. It passed by 0.25 of 1%. Have you ever heard anybody suggesting that the Welsh have a second referendum or whether they want the Welsh Assembly? No. And can you imagine that if Remain had won by one vote, there'd be any big George Soros-type funded groups out there arguing for a second referendum? There'd be some gnawing away inside the Conservative Party and UKIP saying we should have another vote, but realistically, it'd be 25 years away. Something about this just sucks. Dave said, let's have a people's vote. The Chequers deal or WTO rules. Yeah, I wouldn't mind that, Dave. that actually would be very, very interesting, wouldn't it? Be very, very interesting. I mean, to see whether people just say, look, we want nothing to do with any of it, or Mrs May's shabby sellout. I think I know which would win. In fact, in many ways, it'd be a rerun of the referendum that we had, though, wouldn't it? We don't want another vote. We don't need one. Rick says, Labour already want to lock us into a customs union. We know where they stand on Brexit. Well, we know where the pressures are, Rick. We know where the Keir Starmers and others are. We know where the Alistair Campbells are. We know, through history, that Corbyn and McDonnell are Eurosceptic leavers, but they're pretty outnumbered inside the Parliamentary Labour Party. And I put it to you, Rick, they've got some other problems, building up on them, and they could just budge. I don't know. But if they do, I think they'll pay a terrible, terrible electoral price. Clive is calling from Twickenham. Hi, Clive.
Hi, Nigel. First of all, as a member of the EU, yourself, you were, in 2020, aren't they going to, that is the EU, say that all members of the EU will have the same corporate tax and general tax?
Well, that's their ambition.
Law, aren't they? And the Conservatives, in my opinion, knew that. That's why they quickly wanted a vote. Although it was some time before, they wanted us out because they don't want that.
Well, Clive, if you listen to Mr Juncker's State of the Union speech, he says we want a complete European army finished by 2025, and yes, they would like, harmonised corporation taxes. I mean, Clive,
there you are.
Be in no doubt they want to build a United States of Europe with all power at the centre. That is, I think, beyond doubt to anybody who cares to look. Clive, do you normally vote for the Labour Party?
I have since Clement. Well, I wasn't old enough, but since I was only 38.
Right. You're just a youngster then. Yeah.
Yes. I'm not old at all.
So you've been voting Labour since Hugh Gateskill, I guess it would be.
Yes, I remember Hugh. Well, unfortunately, he didn't get a chance. So he died. Yeah.
That's right. He died before the election. Yeah. So if the party, Clive, that you've been supporting for all these years, was to push for a second referendum, what would you do?
I'd say yes, have a second referendum, because more people now know what the outcome will be if we leave. For a start, they haven't been told that prices will go up 30.
Hang on, Clive. Prices went up when we joined, so will prices go up when we leave as well?
Yes, they're going up now all the time. If you look at, I get a regular order from, one of the supermarkets each week. They're going up all the time now, in case, or they're worried about it. I'm not sure which.
Well, perhaps they're ripping you off, Clive.
No.
No, come on. Maybe they're having you over.
Yeah, they're having everybody over.
And have you, Clive?
No, generally, there's Nigel, if I can say.
Yeah.
Now, the manager of one of the, not the one I go to, the top one, W, has said that he's been told prices will definitely go up from 22 to 33% if and when we pull out.
Well, do you know what, Clive? They could go down, of course, because we'd be in control of our own external tariffs, and we could buy cheaper bras, cheaper knickers, cheaper shoes, cheaper food, if we chose to do so. Clive, have you always been pro-EU?
Yes, I have really. Yes. I
Okay.
haven't changed. I don't change. I'm not one of these fickle people that will keep changing at a whim.
No, because in the early days, of course, I mean,
Immigration was the thing, though, wasn't it? Into that.
Oh, of course, it was a huge part of the vote. Because,
that's
but
right.
because traditionally, Clive, the Labour Party, of course, was against the common market, but there's been a big change. Clive, I thank you, and Clive, a lifelong Labour man, pro-EU. He wants the second referendum. We're getting both sides of the argument. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 7:30 and pressure's mounting on the Labour Party at their conference in Liverpool to change their policy and go for a second referendum on our EU membership. I'm asking you, and please, I want Labour voters, Labour-inclined voters to call me. Tories, you're banned this evening. 0345 6060 973. Do you think this is a good idea? I think it actually would reap electoral disaster for the Labour Party. As we heard earlier, albeit from Labour Leave, their estimate is 5.1 million people who voted for Corbyn in 2017 had voted Leave in 2016. But before that, Donald Trump, never far away from the news, and last week was a very, very tough week for the president, to say the very least. But today, he is making news. He was joined on the phone earlier by the Mexican president, Enrique Peña Nieto. I think I've got that right. Here's Donald Trump and the Mexican president on the phone together.
Presidente Trump, ¿cómo está? Muy buenos días.
President Trump, how are you? Good morning.
Thank you, Enrique, and congratulations. That's really a fantastic thing. We've all worked very hard. Your brilliant representatives are sitting right in front of me, and I thought we would congratulate each other before it got out. And I know we'll have a formal news conference in the not-too-distant future.
That's right, folks. That was Donald Trump being nice to the Mexican president, despite all the things that were said during the campaign and since. Now, one of the things that Trump said all through the campaign, he was massively critical of the Clintons, in particular for the NAFTA deal, which he said had cost 1 million Americans their jobs. And I think what we're seeing today is Trump terminating NAFTA, going for a different deal with Mexico, and maybe then one with Canada. To help me through all of this, Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent. Good afternoon, Simon.
Hello, Nigel.
So is that the end of NAFTA?
Well, it's probably the end of NAFTA. It's certainly the end of the acronym NAFTA. President Trump and the Mexican president say that NAFTA is now being replaced by something called the US-Mexico Free Trade Agreement, and they say that they have reached an agreement that will overhaul the rules for building cars across North America, the United States and Mexico. They're going to make sure that more of the vehicles are built in the region, and they'll use more locally produced steel. They're also going to take steps to try and raise wages in Mexico to overcome complaints on the American side of the border that NAFTA essentially has hurt American workers by forcing them to compete with cheaper labor in Mexico. But there is a big caveat here. What President Trump and the Mexican leader announced a couple of hours ago is a deal between the United States and Mexico. NAFTA was a deal between the United States and Mexico and Canada. Canada has not yet struck a deal with President Trump, and if you take a listen to what he said when he was asked during the course of that appearance about the prospect for bringing Canada back into the deal, and he was asked it by the Mexican president, he was still sounding pretty aggressive towards Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister. Take a listen.
Canada will start negotiations shortly. I'll be calling the Prime Minister very soon, and we'll start negotiation. And if they'd like to negotiate fairly, we'll do that. You know, they have tariffs of almost 300% on some of our dairy products, so we can't have that. We're not going to stand for that.
So white smoke emanating from the White House in terms of the trading relationship with Mexico, but not yet in terms of the trading relationship with Canada. And he needs to bring Canada in, Nigel, because all of this is going to require congressional approval. And the worry here will be that without Canada being party to this, securing congressional approval is going to be tougher.
Yeah, I can see that. And I can also see Trudeau not liking this. Trump, of course, doesn't believe in the EU, doesn't believe in NAFTA, believes in bilaterals, and that's very much clearly what he's doing on Mexico. But isn't this, Simon, I mean, after the very torrid time that President Trump has had, isn't this a big, big win for Trump in terms of his own voters? He said he'd get rid of NAFTA. Here he is trying to do it.
Look, there's no question about that, and my inbox is replete with email from the White House insisting that this is President Trump making good on another one of his campaign pledges. And one of the things that distinguishes President Trump, whatever you think of him politically, from his predecessors, is that he does try to make good on his campaign pledges. And so the White House is out there today saying, look, he's done it. The issue here, though, is that he hasn't quite done it, although maybe by the end of the week he'll be announcing a deal with the Canadian Prime Minister, in which case they can truly celebrate. I think it's also worth making the point, Nigel, that the turidity of the last few days is not over yet. I mean, he was announcing this deal, but all the White House correspondents from across the spectrum wanted to know why he's not flying the Stars and Stripes at half-mast above the White House with John McCain.
I'm sure.
That's the story that's still chasing him.
I'm sure. And controversy will never, ever leave the 45th President of the USA. Simon, thank you. That was Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent. And Trump kind of ignoring all the criticism and just ploughing on with his agenda. Right, back to Labour. If they go for a second referendum, is it the right thing for them to do, or am I right in saying it could lead them to electoral disaster? Let's go to Tony in Wimbledon. Tony, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I am very well. So what do you make of this push to get Labour to change their position?
I mean, I understand why they're doing that, because clearly Labour control a large percentage of the vote, and if they can really tap into that Remainer sentiment and get their vote, then it's very likely that Labour and Corbyn will come into power.
So, if there are 5 million Corbyn voters of 17 who'd voted Brexit in 16, and there is reason to think, that in the north of England, people have just simply not changed their mind one little bit. Maybe they feel really angry about this. Surely this costs Labour millions of votes rather than gaining them.
It may cost them millions of votes, you're right. But I mean, there are Remainers like me who may be the minority, but I probably don't even want a second vote. And the reason I don't want a second vote is I think by having this, or second, third, whatever you want to call it, this vote, people who voted for Brexit may feel that what they voted for is not being delivered. And I want the reality of Brexit to be played through. We have people like you and Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris and whoever, saying that Brexit is going to be a success. I really think it's going to be, when I listen to the experts, when I listen
the experts!
The people that...
Be careful, Tony, of the experts.
Just listen up to people who run things like, the head of Sainsbury's and people who actually have a vested interest in making this work properly. When I listen to them and hear what they're saying, it doesn't look good. And then I listen to what you're saying, Nigel, and every time you say, it's bad, Theresa May's bad, you don't come up with solutions yourself. So
I want to be independent, Tony. I want to be independent, Tony. I want to be free.
We're independent. Theresa May already said we're a sovereign nation.
I want us to make our own laws. Tony, thank you. And again, you get back to it, don't you? Is Brexit about politics or is it about economics? Well, the answer, of course, is a little bit of both. Hi, Nigel. I was a Labour member until 2 days ago. I also live in the north. I've had enough of Corbyn and his views on the monarchy, defence, and lack of commitment on Brexit. I was a Remainer. However, I am now firmly on the Brexit side, basically because Project Fear isn't working anymore. And I've had a gutful of how Brussels treats us. Thanks, Nigel. So 2 days ago, someone there that left the Labour Party, and, you've got to be suspicious of opinion polls always, but if you do believe that Delta poll that appeared in the Sun 2 weeks ago, what it's telling you is there are more people that would vote Brexit now than there were just over 2 years ago. And one of the reasons is the way the Barniers and Verhofstadts have behaved. They have looked like bully boys. John is calling from Croydon. Hi, John.
Hi, Nigel. This is a complete con job. This is Nigel.
A con job, right? Explain.
It is. This people's vote. I mean, have you seen the three options on the table, Nigel? The three options are to remain in, to vote for Mrs. Corbyn's Chequers agreement, or to leave with no deal. So the two options for the leavers, chances are if you vote for one or the other, it's going to dilute the vote.
Yeah, well, that's what they want, John. It doesn't.
It's a con job. And, this should be pointed out to people, Nigel. We've seen history repeated. Ireland had a referendum, they then had a second referendum, the same happened in Holland.
Denmark.
This is a complete con job, Nigel.
So, John, and you are a Labour voter, I assume.
Yeah, I am. Yes, for the time being, I have been.
Right, and you were a Leaver. Clearly, I can tell from your tone on that. So, what happens, John, if the party that you've always supported suddenly advocates a second referendum? Do you desert them?
Well, they won't be getting my vote again, Nigel. I'm not happy with them as it is, to be honest with you. So,
but John,
at the moment, I'm sort of politically homeless.
But the Chuka-Ramunas, and the Alistair Campbells, they seem to inhabit a different world to a lot of Labour voters. It is a remarkable statistic, isn't it, that 70% of Labour constituencies voted Leave.
Yeah. Nigel, why aren't these remoteners talking to us about deeper integration? What's going to happen in 2025? When they force everyone to take the euro, when they want to take control.
Whenever we say, John, whenever we predict deeper integration in the European Union, they just say it's lies. They just say it's not going to happen. They just say we'll get opt-outs, we'll be able to delay things. And frankly, John, they've given us 50 years of lies over this, and we've just about had enough of them. John, I thank you. A cynic here says on Twitter, the People's Vote on Twitter has only 52,000 followers, fewer than watch the Arsenal or West Ham home games. Well, that may be where they are at the moment, but they're about to launch a big Soros-funded campaign. Who knows what heights they may go to. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusive on LBC, and it's now 7:45. It's funny, really, in the 2017 general election, Jeremy Corbyn played an incredibly clever game, didn't he? Because in the manifesto it said, we're leaving the European Union, we're leaving the single market, and that meant they got at least 1 million people who voted UKIP in 2015 to vote for them. And yet, at the same time, by writing it in, but not making too big an issue of it, by having many senior people in that campaign who were Remainers and stayed pro-Remain, he managed to get all the Remainers in London and elsewhere to vote for him as well. It's quite a clever game in politics to, get both sides of an argument to vote for you. But in the end, you have to make a decision. He's been terribly careful, hasn't he? Ever since that election, not to show his side. And when he was asked, we played that clip last week, that Channel 4 News clip last week, 6 times, was Brexit going to be a good thing or a bad thing for the country? He point blank refused to answer. Now, at the Labour conference in Liverpool, which we've been talking about, Momentum, of course, the ever more powerful Momentum, are organising their own side event, and they're going to have Jeremy Corbyn speaking, John McDonnell speaking, but one of the groups that's going to be there speaking, and I'm not making this up, folks, it's not April the 1st, but the Empty Cages Collective will be appearing at this Momentum side event to the Labour Party conference. Who are they? They're a group campaigning to abolish jails and all inmates. In fact, the Empty Cages Collective are part of a wider movement who plan for a world without prisons and police. There you are. It's mad. Literally crazy and mad, and yet there are people out there that believe in this stuff. I bet most of you listening to this don't. Teresa is a new caller from Chichester. Hello, Teresa. Good evening.
Hello, Nigel. Thanks so much for taking my call.
Not a bit.
I'm absolutely stuck.
You're stuck. Right, go on, explain.
Well, no, I don't know whether to join the Conservative Party or not, and I'm not a Conservative.
Right. Well, why would you join them if you're not a Conservative?
Because isn't there a 6-week rule or something like that by October? If she gets kicked out, then we've got to cover ourselves and make sure
I see.
we're in the body, so our vote counts, so we don't waste a vote.
So you would like to join the Conservative Party in order to get rid of Mrs May and have a Brexit leader, yeah?
Yes, but do I really want to be... No, I don't want to be Conservative, but I want to get rid of her, and I want to have a real Brexit. So how do I do that?
Well, I think...
How are you voting? Not That's my question.
Well, I'm not joining the Conservative Party. Of course I'm not. I mean, I left them 26 years ago, or whatever it was, and I'm not going to join them. I also think, Teresa, that, Brexit isn't just going to be won within Conservative Britain. What happens within the Labour Party is also very significant too. And if the Labour Party was to adopt this motion at its conference and to three-line whip its own people, at some crucial moment between now and Christmas and get Tory rebels with them, that worries me. So I think actually, Teresa, we have to put pressure on the entire political British establishment. But if you want to join the Tories, I'm not going to stop you. I mean, hey, but if you don't like the party, it's tough to do it, isn't it?
No, but I'm wondering, how do we put pressure on these people? Because, you know, if you're not a Conservative, how do you put pressure on the Conservative Party? Do you write to your MP and...
Will you go and visit? Well, actually, I think people need to do rather more than that. I think they need to demand a meeting with their MP and make it clear to them. Lobby their MP and make it clear to them. Unless they back a proper Brexit, they're not going to get there. You know, your vote won't come around next time.
No, well, no. Our MP used to be Dominic Raab, funny enough, because I lived in Walton-on-Thames.
Yeah.
And that didn't work out very well.
And Dominic Raab, and a strange one, isn't it? Because, you know, Dominic Raab accepted...
Doing what Theresa May says, yeah.
Well, he's carrying the bag, isn't he? He's the bag carrier. He's not really the Brexit secretary. Theresa, I promise you, there are millions of people out there that want to get involved, that want to campaign. You must do it as you see fit. But please, please, please put pressure on your MP. Let's go to Dorking and speak to Victor. Good evening, Victor.
Hi, Nigel. You okay?
I am absolutely fine. So, are you a Labour man, Victor?
No, I have voted Labour in the past, but
yes.
Since I started getting involved in issues with regards to the EU, but back when we were denied a vote on the not the Maastricht Treaty, the European Constitution.
The European, that's right, and then they rebranded it as the Lisbon Treaty. It was exactly
in through the back door.
Yeah, and it was exactly the same as the Constitution, and they didn't give us that reference. The Irish, of course, Victor,
which is what Lord Kerr said, isn't it? When he was asked what is the difference between the European Constitution and the Lisbon Treaty, he said no comment.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth going over that, Victor, quickly, because it's just over a decade ago. So the European Constitution, the French voted no, the Dutch voted no, it was finished, it was dead, it was all over. I briefly, for 48 hours, thought we'd halted the integration project. Stupid me. What did they do? They rebranded it as the Lisbon Treaty. They boasted that because it was a treaty, not a constitution, there'd be no more referendums. They actually boasted, Victor. But the Irish, because of their constitution, had to have a referendum, and they voted no, only to be forced to vote again. So that's the history of that.
Well, going back even further, Douglas Hurd said that the Maastricht Treaty was the high watermark of Europe.
I know.
And the more you dig into all of this history, the more you find out that it's been a full integration project from the Treaty of Rome.
Absolutely, and hardly anybody, Victor, hardly anybody has really... I mean, Tony Benn, Enoch Powell, Michael Foot did way back in the 75 referendum say to people this was about full political integration, but somehow no one believed them, Victor, because the rest of the establishment said it was wild conspiracy theory. So look, I mean, you know, I could argue that we've been lied to for over 50 years. Victor, what does the Labour Party do in this situation? Does it bow to pressure or not?
Well, the irony is that they're in the same position as the Tories, in that they are. The Tories are ideologically committed to the EU, but feel we should leave. And the left wing of the Labour Party hate and detest the EU, but think that we should. But the parliamentary party in particular thinks that we should stay.
Well, it's very interesting, Victor. The old left of the Labour Party was viscerally opposed to the... I mean, you know, Hugh Gateskill was mentioned earlier, the Labour leader, who at their conference in, I think it was 1961 in Scarborough, on the proposal to join the common market, Hugh Gateskill said we'd be giving up 1,000 years of independence. Way back in 1961, Gateskill was saying that. And of course, you can go right up to the 1983 Labour manifesto under Michael Foot. You know, they didn't fare well. It was called the longest suicide note in history. But part of that manifesto was withdrawal from the European community. So there was a great leftist tradition of being against the common market, against the European project, on the grounds of national democracy. The problem, Victor, is the new left in Labour, and I think Momentum in many ways is the face of the new left. They've kind of got a bit more of a kind of Trotskyite approach to this. They see us all as global citizens, no need for any borders. I read out what that group speaking at the Momentum conference a minute ago, that, you know, everybody should be released from prison, and ultimately there should be a world where we don't need police. I mean, that's the new left, Victor.
Yeah, well, so what we're going to do with Peter Sutcliffe then? People like that? That's just political correctness.
I mean, that is completely bonkers. But what I'm saying to you is, the old left of the Labour Party is very, very different to what I'm seeing in the new left. Now,
yeah, no, I understand. That.
However, not amongst Labour voters. And old Labour voters out there in the country are strongly pro-Brexit.
Well, of course they are. I mean, you were talking earlier on about 70% of Labour constituencies voted to leave. In fact, 66% of the constituencies across the board voted to leave.
Yes.
So it was only London. The fact that you've got, they're getting on for 10 million people in the greater London area that held the Remain vote together.
Yeah, I mean, London.
The country as a whole is Eurosceptic. It always has been.
I've got the map of England and Wales, in my office, and every single electoral district, big electoral district, or government district, apart from London and Surrey, in England and Wales, voted leave. So there we are.
Well, there you go.
Victor, do you think? Let me ask you a different question. Do you think a second referendum is going to happen? Do you think Parliament are going to force this upon us?
Well, I think the Bilderbergers and Mr. Soros are going to have their way, and I actually don't think we'll end up leaving. If we do, it'll be Brino, Nigel. It'll be Brexit in name only. I think they've all been playing a very long game after the initial shock of the 24th of June. I think Mrs. May, the Civil Service, the House of Lords, they're in cahoots with the European Union and everything that goes on in the background there. And a friend of mine from Macclesfield, Steve Wall, if you're listening, Steve, he said to me on the 25th, he said we will not leave. There will be a fudge that keeps us in one way or another.
Victor, thank you for your view. Victor there, deeply cynical about the entire political process, about the global elites, and you could argue that I've been pretty critical and pretty cynical about them for a couple of decades, and yet I still think we're going to win. I still think that we are going to leave the European project. I also think the European project itself, I'd be very surprised if it still exists in 10 years' time. Just look at what the leading Italian politicians are saying right at the moment. I'm talking about deputy prime ministers threatening to withhold contributions, for example. Look at what's happening in Eastern Europe with the Viktor Orbáns, the Poles and others saying, we left the Soviet Union, we don't want this one to become like it. I believe that the referendum result that we had will be enacted in the end, but not unless people are prepared to stand up and speak. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'll be back tomorrow night in Brussels at 7 o'clock. At 10 tonight, it's Matt Stadlen. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you.